Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next part of the MQ Health Wellness series. So today's topic we'll be talking about building foundations for life, promoting healthy development in children between the ages of 0 to 5. So my name's Lucy Tran. I'm the Business Operations Manager of Early Learning at UNMQ, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's session. Before I share the format for this event, I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of this gathering to acknowledge the First Nations people of Australia and elders, past, present and emerging. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the layout of this series, I'll be joined by 4 of my colleagues who will each share information and practical tips to support children's development during their early years. So at Macquarie University, we offer a range of children-specific services, including early childhood centres, medical and allied health clinics, which work collaboratively together to support children and their families. So joining me today is Dr. Uther, who's the Paediatrics Discipline Lead at MQ Health, Jan Hanco, who's the Lead Physiotherapist at MQ Health Paediatric Physiotherapy Clinic, Sarah Legge, who's a Senior Speech Pathologist at MQ Health Speech and Hearing Clinic, as well as Dr. Carolyn Schniering, Director of MQ Health Psychology Clinic. After the speakers will be followed by a Q&A session. So I'll hand over to Dr. Uther.
Thanks, Lucy. This session is focused on building foundations of life and promoting healthy development in children in the first 5 years of life. So I guess the first thing we just wanted to talk about was why the early years matter. Why are we focusing on those first 2,000 days? And the first 2,000 days is basically a critical time for physical, cognitive, social and emotional health. What happens during this period impacts every facet of life: learning, behaviour, physical and mental health. And the impacts are sustained through life. At the extreme end, cumulative adverse childhood experiences, such as parental separation, domestic violence or extended illness, have profounder impacts on physical health later in life, with toxic stress in childhood interrupting the normal hormonal and inflammatory pathways and even altering gene expression through epigenetics. Altering normal processes are altered, tissue is damaged, and the rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes and depression in adulthood go up. Today, we're not focusing on this extreme end. Today, we are focusing on the small, everyday activities you can do to influence your child's development in a positive way. It never ceases to amaze me how much infants grow and change in the first few years of life, and in particular, how much they learn. Central to this is the physical development of the brain. At birth, an infant's brain is about 1/4 of the size in adulthood, and it will be in adulthood. And then over the first year of life, it doubles in size. And you can see that picture on the left, that MRI, actually shows the relative size of a baby's brain at 2 weeks to its size at 1 year. In the next year, it grows another 15%. And then by the end of the 3rd year is 80% of its adult size. With this growth, it's not that new neurons, new nerves are forming in the brain, but what's happening is that there's this growth in connections or synapses. And the neural networks in the baby's brain is becoming more and more complex. In the first few years of life, more than 1 million new neural connections form every second. And the image here on the right shows that increase in complexity in neural networks over the first 2 years. We have a genetic blueprint about how these new collections will form, and children's development follows the same pattern globally. However, it's also profoundly impacted by the environmental inputs and exposures that the brain experiences. And the brain architecture will only form as expected if the parents and caregivers respond attentively to the interaction that's initiated by the child. The brain is most plastic in infancy and in the preschool years. And if you get inadequate or inappropriate environmental exposures, then aberrant or incomplete neural networks will form. And it's much easier to set the brain on the right path early in life than to correct course later. When we think about development, we think about a few domains. We think about motor development, gross motor and fine motor development. And our physiotherapist, Jan Hancock, will talk about that today. We think about communication, and a big component of that is literacy. And for that, we have our speech pathologist, Sarah Legge. And then we think about our social and emotional health. And another domain that is sometimes included that's not up here is problem solving. And our psychologist, Carolyn Schniering, will talk about that today. I'll hand over to Jan Hancock.
Thanks, Penny. The first 5 years, or those 2,000 days that Penny has spoken about, is a really rapid period of growth and development of new skills. So our babies start moving their arms and legs, they start rolling, sitting up, pulling to stand and crawling, walking, jumping, running, and hopefully riding a bike. They use their arms and start to move, and they start to reach, and they learn to manipulate, to build and create, to point, to press, to clap, to turn pages, scribble and draw, and do buttons. The rate of typical motor development is very varied between children. So what your child might be doing at this stage might look a little bit different from what the other child at daycare or playgroup is doing. So it's best not to compare, but to check out relevant sources such as the Raising Children Network site for their checklists, or check in your Blue Book where it points out motor development at particular ages. The rate of typical development is wide. For example, children are considered to be typically developing if they start walking between the ages of 10 and 16 months. So when we think about motor skill development, motor learning, or acquiring new skills, this is the process that the brain and the body goes through in developing voluntary control to perform an intentional action. The way we acquire new skills is through practice, and we refine them through more practice. So it's making those complex neural pathways more efficient. There are some elements to good motor practice, and I'll be talking about these now, and I'm going to use the example of bike riding to illustrate it. So we need lots of repetition, and we need the opportunity to practice. If we're not practicing, if we're not doing, then we won't learn those skills. However, it's really important that we are also learning through error. So if we're thinking about learning to ride a bike, it's when we push hard with the pedals, we move. If we don't push hard enough, we don't move. Or if we push too hard, our feet might slide off the pedals. If we're learning to steer, if we steer too hard, we might overbalance and not turn that corner. So we need to practice and learn from our mistakes. Part practice and activity modification is also very important. For example, lots of kids learn to ride with training wheels or someone holding the seat to provide the element of balance, but we learn to pedal and steer. On the other side, you might start with a balance bike where you learn to balance and steer, and then we add the pedals later. Visual practice is also important in learning motor skills. So this is probably easier in those slightly older children where we actually close our eyes and imagine us doing the activity. So imagining that you're riding that bike. So all these elements of practice help to refine those neural pathways so that the movement or motor skill becomes efficient and automatic. So now we can ride on a level surface. However, we still need to practice so that we can put it into different contexts, riding up a hill and down a hill, fast and round corners, etc. So when we're thinking of promoting motor skills in our under fives, we need to provide lots of varied opportunities and frequent practice for their learning. and they need to learn from error. Part practice and activity modification is important, and visual practice as well. So what does that look like? So we think about babies, we love to do lots of tummy time so that they're working on their head and shoulder and chest control, but they might need to be propped up so the activity is modified to make it easier. And babies on an activity mat, they're learning to reach against gravity, but they don't actually have to hold the toy up there as well, which is an added weight. For older children, we want them to be exploring different environments, and we want them to start some rough and tumble play in their preschool years so they learn how to control their body better. We do recommend that you avoid the use of jolly jumpers and baby walkers. For those that don't know what these are, the jolly jumper is a harness system that's either attached to the frame, as in this example, or often in a wall, a doorway. And the baby walker is a frame that you sit the baby in, it's usually on wheels. Both of these have developmental and safety concerns, and you can see there's multiple agencies that recommend their non-use. From a physio perspective, these both limit our learning from error. So the thing that they're practicing is not actually akin to what you would practice in the real world. So now just jumping to muscles and bones, which are rapidly growing at this stage also, we know that skeleton or bone development occurs in response to gravity, the pull of active muscles and weight-bearing stresses. So this is just a schema of the spinal column, the bones of the spine, and you can see in an infant, sorry, I'm just losing my mouse, it's got in utero, it's quite curved, and obviously that's so you can fit inside, it's quite flexible. But then when the baby's out in the world and breathing and responding to gravity, we start to develop these lovely curves which act as shock absorption. And you can see the bones here are much bigger, and these are the bones that are bearing most of the weight-bearing stresses. As a physiotherapist, one of the things we commonly get referred is plagiocephaly, which is a flattening of the back, usually in the back of the head or slightly to the side. And this is in response to prolonged weight-bearing stresses in the same spot. So this is a normal baby's skull. It's quite symmetrical and rounded. Versus you can see the flattened spot here. This is quite a significant example. And so we often look at strategies of changing how this baby is moving to help with improving that. The other thing as a physio we get referred to a lot is concerns regarding children's lower limbs and their alignment. So this varies with growth as well. So as a newborn, we're quite flexible and our limbs are in this bowed position. It's called genu varum. And again, this is in utero, it makes it easier for the baby to fit. But once the baby starts weight bearing and putting those stresses through their legs, they tend to straighten up. And so by the 1 to 2 years, our lower limbs look quite straight. Then from 2 to 4, we go into this knock-kneed phase as we grow. And then we straighten up again as we go through puberty and approach skeletal maturity. And males will tend to be straighter than females. Here, they're still a little bit knock-kneed. We call it genu valgum. And this is to do with the angles of the hips and pelvis. So it's okay to be a little bit knock-kneed when you're 2 to 4. When you need to seek help is when there is asymmetry, when one leg doesn't look the same as the other, or there is excessive knock-kneed or bow leg to the point that this is interfering with the child's ability to move. For example, they might fall over frequently. So to optimise bone and joint development, we want to do frequent practice of active movement, so lots of lovely weight-bearing stresses, so lots of tummy time and supported sitting for babies, supported standing, crawling, walking, running, jumping and climbing. And you don't need expensive equipment. Boxes are great, furniture is great to promote these active movements. Things to avoid include W-sitting, so you can see in this picture here, this is when the child's bottom is actually in contact with the floor, but their legs make this W shape. And that can just put abnormal stresses on the hips, knees, ankle and feet joints. The other thing to look out for is toe walking. So it's quite normal to walk on your toes when you're reaching for something, or you're pretending to be a fairy, you're reaching for the stars. But when toe walking becomes the predominant walking pattern over the age of 2, you should go see your GP, paediatrician or your paediatric physiotherapist. That prolonged toe walking can put those abnormal weight-bearing stresses through the foot and ankle joints, as well as affect the calf and other musculature. So my last point, I just wanted to touch on physical activity. We want our children to be fit, strong and healthy in all aspects of their lives. When we think about fitness, we think about heart and lungs, muscles and bones, and absolutely that's super important. But we need to think about motor movement and coordination and balance. And we need to think about the mental, emotional and social well-being of our children. And it's been shown that children who are physically active are much less likely to have musculoskeletal injury as they move through their childhood and into adulthood. There are national guidelines for physical activity for all ages. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the website there, and there are specific recommendations for time of physical activity for our under 5s. What's super important here is that the recommendations are around sedentary behaviour, in that there should be no screen time for children under the age of 2 and no more than 1 hour per day for those aged 2 to 5 in terms of promoting healthy development. There's no recipe or right thing to do in terms of physical activity, but some elements that make physical activity happen is making it habit or ritual, so part of your regular routine, doing it together with family and friends. It's got to be safe, but there should be that element of motor learning through error and risk-taking. Make it meaningful, active and fun. It can be semi-structured like a dance class or a martial arts class, but free active play is completely appropriate. And usually competitive play is more introduced at school age. We need to make sure our children are spending less time sitting and being restrained. And you can look at local play groups or community Facebook page for local ways to get your children physically active as well. I'm going to hand over now to Sarah Legge, who is a senior speech pathologist in our speech and hearing clinic.
Well, thank you, Jan. So, much like exactly as we've heard with our motor skills, our communication skills develop in essentially the same way. We need high degrees of practice, we need to hear and see things lots of times, and we need to be able to have multiple repetitions of what is happening in our communication skills with our children in order to learn how to communicate as well. So same pathways, same motor, but also cognitive pathways working together to develop our communication skills. So just in case people aren't aware, I've got a little slide here about what a speech pathologist does. There's no way I can cover all of these things today, so we're going to talk about a really particular area that we can all do with our children or with children who are in our care that will be helpful no matter where they're at with their communication skills. So communication encompasses a wide range of factors. So we don't just work with children, but with adults as well on their literacy, language, speech, voice, swallowing and fluency difficulties, and working together with families to help them achieve goals and advocate for the needs of their children. Particularly today, I'm going to talk about literacy because it's one of the easiest things that we can all do and work together to help children to participate in everyday activities. So, as we all know, reading and writing are essential for participation in all aspects of life. It is very difficult to do all of the things that we need to do in our adult lives without some degree of reading and writing competence. So there's some research there that you can see that states that strong literacy skills are linked to our academic achievement at school, our higher qualifications after school, and in the long term, greater quality of life. And so one of the easiest things we can do with our children while they're young is to read books with them, to help them to set them up for success with eventually mastering all of the things that they need for literacy skills. Now, there's many ways that we can do that. However, the one that I'm going to talk about particularly today is a skill called dialogic reading. And it's a key way that we can help develop literacy throughout childhood. And so there's a very technical explanation there, but I'm going to give you an example of what it might look like in just a little moment. So it's the process of having a dialogue with students or children around what they're reading. Now, that's going to look very different with your 1-year-old than with a 10-year-old or a 5-year-old. And so we'll talk a bit about how we might do that differently. But what it does is it draws on the information that you, the parent or the caregiver, already know, and all the things we already know about the world around us to help us to engage together with the book that's in front of us. And what it does is it helps to develop our vocabulary, our narrative skills, so our ability to tell a story, and the complexity with which we can do that. So one of the ways that we can help facilitate that dialogue between teachers or parents with children is to choose books that are relevant and of interest to the child. That may not be something that you're particularly interested in, but it is something that the child is particularly interested in. So dinosaurs, diggers, fairies, whatever it is that the child is interested in, there is sure to be a book about it. And so they are the books to choose early on. What we're going to do with all ages is to encourage a dialogue, so encourage talking together by firstly acknowledging, so responding to what a child says about the story by providing praise for doing that. So if they say, I can see a car, you say, yes, that is a car, I can see it too, so that they know that they've been heard and it encourages them to do it again. We can do questions, so asking them questions about the story. That doesn't have to be about what the words say, it can be about the pictures or anything that you can think of around the book itself. And then the third thing that we can do is to expand, so encouraging the child to add more information to their own responses. So if they say bus, when you're pointing to a picture in the story, you could say, yes, that is a bus, a red bus, it goes fast, and then get them to add a few more things to what they've already told you. So as I said, this is going to look a little bit different depending on the age of the child that you're sitting with doing some book reading together. We do know there's some excellent research to show that babies whose caregivers read with them during infancy, which means from 0 up, have stronger language and literacy skills in primary school. So it's never too early to pick up a book, and it's not going to look like what you think reading a book might look like with a baby, but what you want to do in those 3 categories that we've just talked about is to acknowledge. So wait and watch and give that child, your 0 to 3-year-old, time to interact with the book. Look at what they're interested in. Look at the ones that they go to all the time. Have something available for them to choose, and then have a look at what they want to do when they get to the book. Now, sometimes early on in the 0 to 3-year-olds, that involves a bit of ripping. So good, sturdy, strong picture books are the way to go. Some of those lovely bath books that are a bit squeezy and are quite tactile are good ones to choose. You're not necessarily going to give them ones that can get damaged. However, at this stage, we're going to acknowledge and look and point to the things that we can see together in the book and say the word. So again, because we're looking at how to give them the words for what they're learning to do. So if they're pointing to a picture of a bird, you say bird. So you're acknowledging that you've seen what they're pointing to. You might ask them some questions. So questions about pictures for this age group. They might not answer you with words, they might babble or action. So they might smile or touch the book or point to the thing that you've said. They might say the animal name or quack, quack, you might do if you're looking at a duck together and adding the action. And then you can expand on what they do say or what they do in response to the book. So you might repeat the word that the child says and expand on it. So if they're looking at a book and say bee, you might say, yes, bee, the bee is buzzing. You're going to give them more things which will help to expand the neural pathways so that they know more things about bees from when they started that book with you. For your preschool age kids, you're going to do those same things, but also add on to that. So what we want to do is maximise their learning opportunities. We want to read books that support both the interaction of things that they already know, but also adding new words to the things that they don't know. Books are particularly helpful in helping us to learn new vocabulary about things that we don't see in our everyday life. So particularly helpful for learning about animals that they never would have seen before, for learning about places that they've never been to before. And so that is an easy way to introduce some new words for them. So we're going to do the same steps. We're going to acknowledge. We're going to let our preschoolers hold the book and practice turning the pages. We're going to talk about how pictures are the same or maybe not the same to your child's life. So maybe does the house look the same as the house that we live in, or does it look really different? Does that look like it's really cold where they're living, or is it really hot where they're living? You can work those things out together. Again, we're going to ask some questions. So we can ask questions about the pictures, and as we're moving up in our preschooler life, getting closer and closer to starting school, we can start talking about the sounds in the words. So you could point to a letter in the word and ask them if they can make that sound. One of the easiest way to do that is whatever the sound that starts their name. So for me, if I was looking, I'd say, oh, there's a sound, that's what starts my name, Sarah. And then you can talk about the sounds as it's listed there. You can do as much or as little of that as you feel comfortable with, but just some easy introduction to what it means when you're looking at the text on a page. And then you can expand. So talking about an object's function is an easy way to expand some information if they've just told you about the object. So they say, oh, it's an umbrella. Oh, yeah, you're right, that is an umbrella. What do we use an umbrella for? And give them a chance to answer you. So a little example for you, because it's always good to see some of these things in action. So I've just got a couple of pages from, it's actually the Speech Pathology Australia Book of the Year from last year. So it's called The Thing That Goes Ping. And you'll notice I don't read many of the words. I'll read some of them to give some context to the story. And the thing about the books is if you're repeating the same books over and over again, the kids probably get to know the story and then you can do some different things with them. So, for example, I might say, in the faraway town of Figgy-Traling, you may hear the faint ring of a thing that goes ping. And then the child might say, oh, I can see a tractor. You say, yeah, you're right. There is a tractor there. It's red. Can you see anything else that's red? And then get them probably to look at the red building. Yeah, I agree, they're the same. They're the same colour. Then you could ask a question. So, oh, show me where the road is. Where's the road in this book? And then you might use your fingers to trace through the contours of the road. Great, you found the thing that I asked you to. And then you might expand. Oh, there's lots of water in this picture. How many lots of water can you find? You might count them. And then if they say, oh, there's an oval shape here. Oh, great, yeah, there is. Where's another oval shape? So you're adding on to what they've already told you. And then we might go to the next page of the book. Pardon me, sir, have you recently seen the thing that goes ping? You might say, oh, I heard two words that sound the same there. Thing and ping. They sound the same at the end. I like how they sound. That's called a rhyme. You might introduce a new concept just by looking at the book together. Or for your younger kids, you might look at the pram. Who do you think might be in the pram? So really starting to ask those predicting kind of questions to get them to engage further with the book. And then the next thing just on this page to point out, obviously you could read the words, there's lots of things you could talk about there, but there might be a new word that they've never heard before. So are you aware that I'm not a bear? No, I've seen nothing. Let's say, have you ever heard the word aware before? What do you think that means? Let's think about it together. Read it again. Are you aware that I'm not a bear? I think that might mean, do you know that I'm not a bear? What do you think? And then onward you would go through the book. So there's a real engagement together around what you're looking at, not just flipping through the pictures. Now, for your younger kids, you probably won't get that many goes at doing it, but a couple of simple questions as you go through the book together. And your goal might be to add an extra page each time you read the book, depending on their attention span. The key things to do with anything that you do with reading is to make it fun. It's not meant to be hard. It's not meant to be a chore. I know there might be some people who have struggled themselves with reading, and that's okay. It doesn't matter if you're not a particularly good reader yourself. You can still talk about the pictures together in the book, and that is the point of doing it together. So some easy ways to do that is to make it part of your normal routine at home. So just before bed is often a really good time. The more times you do this together, the more predictable it becomes for your child, so they know what to expect, and then they learn and do it again and again. Making it fun like I did with every time I came to the word ping, I said it in a slightly different voice. I made it a bit sillier. You can act things out. If somebody's knocking on the door, you knock on the door and use some intonation and emotion to help it to sound more engaging for your child. And 10 to 15 minutes is for your preschooler about the limit of how much time you want to spend doing it. But if they're enjoying it and you're happy to keep going, keep going. For your babies, you might do sort of 2 to 5 minutes, just engaging with the book together. Just a quick note on if you speak multiple languages at your house, which is fantastic, keep doing it. Keep going in whatever your best language is. That's what you'd want to do when you're doing the book together, reading the book in your best language together. So there's a couple of ideas there of what to do, but encourage families to keep reading and speaking in your multiple languages. That's fantastic. We want to be exposed to and learn all of the languages that are important in our family setting. There are some great books that are available in more than one language. So your local library will know those sorts of answers. So that would be a great place to ask for where there's some books that might be in your particular language that you speak at home. If you and your child code switch, so you switch between languages while you're talking, that's okay. Don't discourage it. Some words are more easily understood in one language compared to another. And so you might talk about the differences between the words and that we say it this way in language number 1, but we say it a different way in language number 2. And you can certainly do all of those things, even if the book is in English or in the other language. Whatever your best language is, you can ask all of those questions and engage together in your best language. We want to be giving good language models to our kids, and so we want to be speaking in whichever the language is that is the easiest for us to do that. Just a couple of notes about milestones. There's lots of communication milestones that we pass as we go through that 0 to 5 time frame. There's just a couple of ideas there about what you might be looking for your 3 to 5-year-olds in particular. There's lots of things that happen, but what we really want them to do is to be starting to use their communication in a way that is getting them ready to start attending school once they get to 5. So some of the important things to be looking for is definitely using 3-word sentences at 3 years of age. So I want ice cream is a pretty good sentence. You might get some if you ask really nicely. And so you really want to be putting those longer utterances together by the time you're 3. You'd be expecting them to be following some multi-step instructions. So put your bag away and wash your hands. Now, sometimes kids are following those sorts of instructions because they know the routine, and that's okay. But it's good too to ask them to do things just to see whether they're able to follow those instructions that you've asked them to do. There's a note there about knowing to look at the speaker, whoever is talking. Sometimes that can be tricky, but some gentle encouragement to do that is helpful. Understanding that the words in books have meaning, like we've just talked about, and maybe starting to talk about how those words look as a practice for when we start reading as they get over the age of 5. And looking at books in the right order and the right sequence in the way that they go. So depending on the language that your child speaks, sometimes that means books goes from left to right, sometimes that means they go from right to left, so whichever way, looking at them the right way and holding the book the right way up, not upside down, so that we're practicing the orderly way that books go. That's a bit of a blurry picture, but their link is there for you to have a look. There's a whole lot of different milestones for all of the ages from 0 to 5. And so that's a really great resource just to have a look, just to keep in mind checking whether you're meeting those milestones or not at each age of development. And then I've just put this in to round off for me, just ideas about what to do if you are concerned about your child's communication skills. And so obviously speech pathology is a great place to start. So we're here to support children with their language and literacy development. It is better to refer early if you have any concerns rather than waiting and hoping that things will get better on their own. It's always better to get referred early. And there's some steps there about how you might find a speech pathologist in your area, and also a whole lot of different resources that will help support your child's communication, which I've got listed there as well. That's more so that you can go away and have a look at some of those resources that might be helpful as you make some decisions about where your child's up to with their communicating. I'm going to hand over to Carolyn now, who is our Director of the Psychology Clinic at MQ Health.
Well, Sarah, I want ice cream.
It's a very, very powerful sentence.
I hope Sarah brings me some ice cream at the end of our presentation. We're delighted to have you here with us today. My name is Carolyn Schniering. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work a lot with children and adolescents. I was one of the original authors actually of the Cool Kids program that some of you might be aware of through the Centre for Emotional Health. And today I'll be talking about 0 to 5-year-olds, normal fears, and how we might help to build resilience and promote approach behaviours and confidence in our young people. So we know that it's very normal for children to have fears. Fear is one of many emotions that we feel and is part of life. Fear and anxiety is a normal response to situations that we find threatening or difficult. If we think about a young baby, you know, they know really nothing other than what they've learned from us in the home. So as parents, you know, we are their whole world. And so, you know, it makes perfect sense that when children experience something novel or new, that they might feel afraid of that. They're unsure, they haven't seen it before, they don't know what it means. They're like aliens in a sense in our world. So some of the early fears to emerge are around 8 to 9 months, where babies can recognise their caregivers' faces and will start to react often in a fearful way to new faces. So could be to family members or strangers, they might cling or show fear. And then as toddlers get a little older, you know, anywhere from kind of, 10 months to 2 years, they may start to fear separation from their primary caregiver and want to cling on and not separate. Kids kind of from 4 to 6 will often fear pretend things. So it's difficult for them to differentiate what is real and what is imaginary. So the monster under the bed feels very real to them. They're not able to tell that that monster is in their mind. To them, that monster is really real and under there. And then older kids fear more real life dangers. So, you know, they might worry about wars they hear about or COVID or other things they see in the news. So it's normal for kids to have some fears growing up. I'd like to talk for a little moment now about anxiety. So what do we mean by anxiety? So anxiety from a psychological point of view is essentially that emotion of fear, stress, worry. As we've said, it's a very normal emotion. And the way in which anxiety shows itself is across a number of different components. So we might notice that our thoughts change. So when we're anxious or worrying, we're tending to think about all the bad things that could happen. So we're thinking, I'm not going to do well, or I'm going to fall, or mum won't come back, or the monster will get me. So the thoughts focus very much on the bad thing that you think might happen. We also notice that our bodies can be impacted. So when we're anxious, as an adult, you might have noticed yourself, if you're feeling really worried, you might find that, you know, your tummy can have butterflies, or you get a headache, or you might notice your heart races. So in the same way, our kids will often complain if they're anxious, I have a tummy ache, mum. I don't want to go to preschool, I have a tummy ache, or, you know, I don't feel well. And the behavioural part of anxiety is that we basically want to avoid the situation that we fear. So that's that real fight or flight response. We don't want to face it. So kids that are fearful of situations won't want to face them. They'll do whatever they can to avoid them often. There are situations where fear can be quite adaptive. You know, if you go to cross the street and you see a car, fear is very helpful for us that we don't step out. But there are times when fear can become a problem for us. So when is anxiety a concern for your young person? The general rule of thumb that we use as psychologists is that anxiety, you know, might be becoming a problem for your child if you're noticing that the amount of fear and the frequency with which they're experiencing fear is clearly excessive compared to their peers. So most kids are going to feel anxious or a bit upset going to preschool some days. But if you're having difficulty every single morning on a preschool day getting your child to preschool, and it's really difficult and taking them a really long time to settle, that might suggest that there's a bit, you know, more of a problem there that needs attention. The other rule of thumb we use is if that fear leads to really significant avoidance. So if the fear was so high that you couldn't actually get your child to preschool many days, that would be a high level of avoidance. The final two signs we look for is the anxiety really very distressing for your child? So part of growing up is we will experience some distress. That's just normal. Life doesn't always go our way. Things can be difficult. And part of building resilience is actually letting kids feel a bit of that distress and helping them to find ways to manage that. But if the distress is really high, your child's really upset, you know, that might be a sign. And if you're noticing that it's interfering with their daily functioning or their capacity to kind of reach some of the milestones that we've talked about. So if it's really a lot harder for them maybe to play with their preschool friends or to try reading or a puzzle, but there's other ways you're really noticing it's impacting them. That's also when we would say it may be something to get some help for. So sometimes people will say, well, you know, where does anxiety even come from? And it's a really good question. So essentially, there is some genetic component to anxiety. So we know that some kids are more sensitive and may be more likely to be anxious. So, you know, the trait that is inherited is not anxiety itself. It's the tendency to be more emotional or more reactive to the things that happen to us. I remember when I was in year 12, I would be driving to school, very studious, and I would pass some of my peers, usually boys, driving in the other direction with surfboards on their roofs. And they were peers that did not have this gene. Those of us that are a bit more reactive might find we're more likely to get stressed. So some kids, just by their personality, their nature, may be more sensitive to reacting to stressful events. So essentially, models, models of etiology, as we call them, or cause, suggest that when children face stressful situations, that they may have thoughts about what will happen. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to ride my bike and have fun, they will think, when I get on my bike, I'm going to fall and really hurt myself. And so the thinking tends to be always, the glass is half empty, something really bad will happen. And then the response to that is heightened anxiety and avoidance. I'm not getting on the bike. Sorry, Jan, I'm not getting on the bike. Forget it, Mum. And then you've got a real challenge on your hands. And what the theory suggests is that over time, the more we avoid situations, the more we fear them. And you would know that as an adult too. The more you avoid doing something that scares you, over time, the more anxious we feel about that. So that's essentially that loop that's shown in the picture there. So how are we going to help to build resilience as parents? So one of the things that's really something that's close to my heart is that we are sensitive caregivers, and we can look at our kids and actually slow down enough to really see what's happening for them. Sometimes we're so flat out, especially as mums, we're so busy just trying to get to everything that we don't slow down enough to really look at your child's face, look at the emotional expression, look at their body language, and help them to start to build a vocabulary around their emotions. So, if you see your child's looking quite apprehensive, label that for them. You look like you're feeling quite scared. And if they nod, say, I can see that, your face is really worried. And if they're able to talk to you, developmentally, if they're at that age, ask them, what is it that's worrying you? What do you think will happen? And so whenever we're working with emotions with our kids, we want to validate that feeling. So even if it seems completely irrational to you, in their mind, it's real. So it's really important not to say, don't be silly, come on, you'll be all right. It's really important to say, yeah, I can see how that would be scary for you. So really validating that anxiety or fear. So you're not saying that you're not going to push them a little, we'll get to that in a moment, but you're just acknowledging that for them, that experience is real. And the other thing we can start to do is introduce the idea that scary feelings will drop away or disappear if we face situations. So typically what happens is we get this rise, like a wave coming up, and then as we stay in the situation long enough, the anxiety will hit a peak and then slowly drop away. And so each time your child faces something that's difficult for them, that wave will become lower with each situation that they face. So let's talk a little about parenting. So one of the things that I've always found rather frightening as a parent is just how much influence we have over our children. So children are sponges, and we can actually make a really significant contribution by modelling calm and courageous behaviour. So So this takes a little bit of focus on the self. So, you know, I encourage you maybe to do some self-reflection of your own today, and to think about in your day-to-day life, you know, what would we see if we looked at you in the room, and about the importance of kind of modelling staying calm, slowing down, and being courageous and brave in approaching things that might be a bit tricky. So a lot of the families I've worked with, for example, parents will come in and the parents are real warriors. And so mum and dad are worried about, oh no, this could happen and that could happen, and what if she falls, or what if he doesn't do well? And you can see very much that kids have picked up on that worry. So watch your own worry, and also just be mindful of the cues that you give. So kids will pick up on any of the those cues. So if you're saying, off you go, you'll be right, it's all right, go and get on that bike, and then I'll give you some ice cream. What you might be inadvertently doing is actually giving off just those little cues, even non-verbal or slightly verbal in the tone of your voice, that actually you are a bit worried about them getting on the bike. So just being mindful, you need to be cool as a cucumber, really calm. Off you go, let me see you get to the end of the drive. And that idea that even if something goes wrong, the message you're kind of wanting to give is it's no big deal. You'll be all right. So encourage brave behaviours, use lots of opportunities to promote independence in your child. So kids that are anxious often fear new situations or novel situations they've never experienced before. So using everyday opportunities to encourage them to face new things. So giving them the money to pay for something in a shop, or saying hello to somebody new at school when you're picking up an older sibling, or trying a new bike you've never seen before, or patting a pet at the pet shop that might be something they've never experienced. So really using those daily opportunities to go to new places, speak to people, try new things, to give them that opportunity to build independence. If you do feel that there's a particular situation that your child fears, so let's say separation is difficult, for example, there are some clever strategies to specifically work on those areas. So the idea is to help your child to face those situations in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming for them. So what we do is we suggest to break it down, keep the steps small, and keep practicing those same steps until the child feels more comfortable in that situation. We suggest rewarding after practice, not criticising or belittling, and perhaps most importantly, avoiding stepping in to assist. So kids that are more anxious tend to have parents that step in more and are kind of protective, or don't let them experience too much distress. And so a little bit of anxiety and fear is a normal part of growing up. So it's really important to hang back and just let your child have a go so that they learn they can manage that. So small steps, you know, it might be, for example, let's leave you with someone you don't know as well for 10 minutes while mum goes outside and hangs up the washing, and then moving on to slightly bigger and bigger steps. So this is the way in which we overcome fears in young people, helping them face it gradually. So in summary, you know, you have a little bit of information now about kind of normal fears and when we might be more concerned, just monitoring those as your child develops. We talked about being a role model and using those clever parenting strategies to promote your child's independence and resilience, giving them lots of specific praise when they do well. Using repeated practice if you feel there are specific areas that are a challenge for them. And if you do have concerns, seeking help if needed. So psychology clinic is where I'm the director. We're one point of contact. Emotional Health Clinic have a number of fabulous resources for anxiety in young people, including the book that's up on the screen there. And you're also welcome to reach out to me if I can help you in any way. So thanks for showing interest today in attending our seminar.
Hi, it's Penny Uther again. I've just got a quick little summary, and I'd like to thank all our speakers for sharing their expertise with you all. And this is more of a general roundup. So it's what should you do if you're concerned about your child's development? Firstly, look through the Blue Book. So there is a little checklist there in the Blue Book for every age and stage, and just make sure that your child's doing everything on that. If you're concerned that they're not, where can you go? I think GPs are very useful. Early childhood nurses, so the early childhood nurses can do another screen called the Ages and Stages questionnaire, which might flag if there are other concerns. You can book into an allied health clinician without a referral. So you can just go and see a physiotherapist or a speech therapist or a psychologist if you're concerned about one specific thing, or go back to your GP and get a referral to a paediatrician if you're concerned about the global development. There are other things to just quickly touch base with, and these are useful general resources. So the Raising Children website is a really good parenting website. It's got a lot of tips and tricks about common parenting concerns like fussy eating or what to do around bedtime. Resourcing Parents gives some courses. There are problems that everyone has, and the Resourcing Parents website can give you some suggestions about where you can go if you're struggling with those things. Playgroup New South Wales, Healthy Living website, the Early Learning Centres. Remember that your early childhood education and care centres do have experts in child development there. So definitely reach out with them, see if they've got any concerns. And then I've just put 1-800 RESPECT up there because we do know that domestic violence is a concern in our community. But I'll hand back to Lucy for the last couple of minutes.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. So thank you to everybody for coming along to our session, and for those of you who have added questions. So we do have one question from Sharon for Jan. So I'll just invite Jan to come up really quickly. So Sharon's question is, how can we avoid W-sitting?
It's very tricky. So children that W-sit are generally quite flexible, so there's nothing you can do particularly. Strengthening of certain muscle groups does help there. So alternates are just to encourage good sitting, so cross-leg sitting or long leg sitting, so on your bottom with your legs out in front, or making a ring, so with your feet together, or butterfly wings and flap your butterfly wings. Try little stools. Are good as well. So particularly for those little ones, you can just get little stools and sit on the stool rather than on the floor.
Thank you very much, Jan. That pretty much is close to bringing us to time. So thank you everybody once again for joining us, and everyone who's worked behind the scenes to bring this presentation to life. It's been, I've found it very interesting, very informative, but also very practical as well. So I hope the viewers feel the same way. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, we're offline. Thank